She's going back for a third plate. The company should start deducting the buffet cost from her paycheck. Laughter erupted from the table. Jolene stood in the middle of the buffet line, plate in hand, hearing every single word. No one in that banquet hall spoke up for her. No one needed to. Their silence was already the answer. Jolene set the plate down, turned around, looked straight at the woman who had just said it. A girl her own age, freshly styled hair, legs crossed, sitting among her group of friends as if the entire room were her personal stage. Jolene spoke, not loud, not quiet, just enough for the whole table to hear. "You should worry about your own mouth before you worry about my plate." Then she picked up her plate, sat down at another table, and finished every last bite. She did not walk away. She did not look down. She finished it all, 7 years later. At one of the most exclusive restaurants in Chicago, the woman who had said those words was wearing a server's uniform, carrying a tray of cocktails, walking toward the VIP table. And the person sitting at that VIP table right beside the most powerful man in the city was Jolene. This story began with a plate of food, and it ended in a place that no one in that banquet hall 7 years ago could have ever imagined. If you want to know what happened in those 7 years, stay until the end. Hit like and share if you believe no one has the right to define someone else's worth, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next story. 7 years ago, Jolene Marsh was 21 years old, just stepping out through the gates of her university with a degree in finance and not a single meaningful connection in the industry. She applied to a mid-sized financial firm in downtown Chicago, a place large enough to carry a name, yet small enough that everyone recognized each other's faces. Her position sat at the very bottom of the office hierarchy, data entry, and analytical support. She earned it through an entrance exam, not because someone picked up the phone and called in a favor. That same hiring round, Tiffany Kent walked into the company as well, but she entered through a different door. Tiffany's father played golf with an executive, and that alone was enough to place her directly into an assistant department manager role on her very first day. 21 years old, with nothing yet proven, yet already seated near the window, with her own meeting schedule. The office had a kind of division no one ever spoke aloud, yet everyone understood. Jolene sat in the corner, near the printer, where the steady hum of paper passing through filled the air above her head for 8 hours each day. She worked in silence, bent over spreadsheets, rarely looking up unless someone called her name to ask for another copy of a report. Tiffany, on the other hand, stayed across the floor, where the light was softer and the laughter came more easily. There were always people around her, always someone agreeing with her. After the incident at the buffet party, things didn't stop. For Tiffany, Jolene became something suspended between a joke and a habit. In the break room, Tiffany would speak just loud enough for others to hear, asking who keeps eating lunch alone like that, isn't that just sad? In the elevator, when Jolene stepped inside, someone from Tiffany's group would glance down and let a faint curl of a smile form, the kind that needed no sound to be understood. There was a group chat for the office that Jolene was never invited into. She knew because now and then someone would leave their screen lit on a desk, and she would catch a glimpse of her name in the messages. She couldn't read the content. She didn't need to. It didn't happen every day, but it happened often enough for Jolene to understand that she wasn't invisible in this office. She was seen, but only in one particular way. Jolene didn't react. Not because she didn't hear, not because she didn't feel the sting, but because she had already spent all of her reactions at that party. She had said what she needed to say. The rest of her, she gave to the spreadsheets. She worked. She analyzed data faster than anyone else on the team. She wrote reports that were clean, precise, not a single number out of place. Yet every time she submitted one, it disappeared into her manager's inbox and was never mentioned in meetings. Someone else always did the presenting. 6 months into the job, Jolene understood something no one had told her. The system of advancement here didn't run on competence. It ran on connections, on lunches with the right people, on the nod of someone upstairs. And she had none of those things. She could stay another 5 years and still find herself sitting beside that same printer. Jolene resigned after exactly 1 year. She wrote her notice, submitted it to Human Resources, and cleared her desk in 15 minutes. There was no farewell party. No company-wide goodbye email. On her final day, she carried her bag through the lobby, her eyes fixed straight ahead toward the exit, greeting no one. Tiffany stood near the reception desk with two friends. She watched Jolene pass, then turned and spoke in a voice as light as if she were commenting on the weather, saying that she finally realized she didn't belong here. Her friends let out a quiet laugh. Jolene heard it, every single word. She didn't turn back. She stepped through the glass doors, out into the open air, and the door closed behind her with a soft click. She didn't know that 7 years later, those words would return, but not in the way Tiffany imagined. Jolene was unemployed for 3 months. She returned to her small apartment on the south side, where the sound of the train passing every 20 minutes had become a kind of clock she didn't need to look at to know the time. The apartment had 1 bedroom, a kitchen just wide enough for a single person to stand in, and a window that looked out over the parking lot of the laundromat below. Her mother, Ruth, lived 4 bus stops away, in a place even smaller. She worked the night shift at a food packaging plant on the southern edge of the city, the kind of job that began at 10 o'clock at night and ended at 6 o'clock in the morning, just as the rest of Chicago was beginning to wake and she was only just making it home to sleep. The two of them lived out of sync, like the hands of 2 clocks moving across different faces. They rarely saw each other, rarely called, because Ruth wasn't someone who talked on the phone, and Jolene had inherited that from her. But every month, a package arrived, a brown paper box, carefully sealed with tape, no letter, no note. Inside was food Ruth had made herself: cornbread, marinated meat frozen and ready, a jar of sauce that Jolene knew must have taken an entire afternoon to prepare before Ruth left for her night shift. There was never a note inside. There didn't need to be. Jolene would open the box, look at each item, and understand that this was how her mother said everything she never put into words. Her mother knew she was struggling. Her mother didn't ask because she knew her daughter didn't want to be asked. But she was still there. One evening, Jolene called her. It was nearly 6 in the morning. Ruth had just finished her shift. Jolene could hear the key turning in the lock on the other end, the sound of her setting her bag down, the scrape of a chair being pulled out. Jolene asked if she was tired. She didn't ask about work, didn't ask about money, didn't ask about anything they were both thinking, but neither wanted to say first. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Her breathing came through the phone, the kind of breath that belonged to someone who had stood for 8 hours straight along a packaging line. She said that tired was tired, but she was still standing, and Jolene was too. Jolene didn't say anything more. Neither did Ruth. The call ended not long after, gently, without a drawn-out goodbye, just a soft acknowledgement from each of them before the line went silent. But those words stayed with Jolene longer than any advice she had ever read in a book. Tired was tired, but still standing. It wasn't encouragement. It wasn't philosophy. It was simply the truth, spoken by someone who had lived by that truth for 20 years. A week after that call, Jolene found a job posting from Caraway Holdings, the largest real estate investment firm in Chicago, a name that anyone working in finance in the city recognized, even if not everyone fully understood what Caraway actually did behind the buildings that bore its name. What made Jolene stop at that listing wasn't the reputation of the company. It was a single line at the bottom, stating that the hiring process was based entirely on a competency assessment and didn't require a referral, no connections. No one needed to pick up a phone and call anyone. Just her mind and a test. Jolene applied. She applied to only one place. Not because she was careless, but because she didn't need 10 doors. She only needed one to open the right way. The test lasted 3 hours. 120 candidates sat in the 4th-floor conference room of Caraway's building, each at their own table, each with a simulated case file and a single open-ended question: analyze the financial structure of a failing real estate project and propose a solution. Jolene didn't earn the highest score. She placed second. The top score belonged to a young man from an Ivy League school, his work polished, methodical, not a single step out of place. But the evaluator didn't make a call for him. The evaluator called Reed Caraway because of Jolene. Because in her analysis, there were 3 lines the evaluator read over and over again, still unable to believe that someone at her level could have written them. She hadn't followed the formula. She had turned the problem inside out, examining the failing project from the lender's perspective rather than the investor's, and pointed out that the way to save it wasn't by injecting more capital, but by restructuring the debt. The evaluator said over the phone that in 9 years of working there, He had never seen anyone approach a problem from that angle. Reed Caraway was 33 years old, the kind of man who, when he entered a room, everyone noticed, not because he made noise, but because he didn't. His silence carried weight, the kind that occupied more space than any voice. On paper, Caraway Holdings was the largest real estate investment firm in Chicago. But in conversations that were never recorded, in rooms no one spoke about once they stepped outside, Caraway was something else. Construction contracts no one dared compete for, loans no bank would approve, yet Caraway could provide. Commercial districts that ran smoothly not because the law protected them, but because there was a name behind them no one wanted to offend. Reed never raised his voice in front of outsiders. He didn't need to. His authority wasn't the kind that had to be loud to be heard. It was the kind where he could sit at the head of a table in silence, and the other 12 people would lower their voices on their own. He read Jolene's test. Slowly, underlined the 3 lines the evaluator had mentioned, then picked up the phone and called Human Resources. He told them to keep her. 3 words. No explanation. None needed. On Jolene's first day at Caraway Holdings as an employee, no one greeted her. No one introduced her to the team. No one showed her where the coffee machine was or which conference rooms belonged to which group. Her desk was at the far corner of the 6th floor, beside the old record storage, where the hallway light stretched across the floor each afternoon in a long, pale strip no one noticed because no one passed that way often. Jolene sat down, opened her laptop, began. The first weeks unfolded in a pattern she already knew too well. Colleagues went to lunch in groups. No one invited her. Her manager handed her small, forgettable tasks anyone could do. She wasn't treated badly. No one spoke against her outright. But she existed at the edges of everything, like an extra chair no one had yet thought to remove. But Jolene didn't do what people expected her to do. She didn't try to prove herself by working longer hours, staying later, arriving earlier. She did something else. While the rest of the 6th floor chased active projects, Jolene opened the ones that had already been closed. She went into the archives, pulled out financial records from 5 years earlier, files layered with so much digital dust it seemed no one had opened them since the day they were stored. She read every line, every number, every transaction. And in her 3rd month, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon no one would later remember, Jolene found it. A flaw buried deep within the financial structure of 3 past projects. The kind of flaw that revealed nothing if you looked at each project alone. But when placed side by side and followed through the flow of money, it surfaced, clear as a crack running along a wall. Everyone passed, but no one ever bent down to see, and that crack was repeating. In the very project the entire 6th floor was working on, Jolene stared at the screen, at the numbers, then at her manager's email inbox, the one she knew would never read anything she sent. She knew what she had to do, and she knew the price it might demand. Jolene sent the email to her direct manager on Monday afternoon. The subject line was short: financial structure error, urgent review needed. She attached her analysis, each problematic line clearly marked. She estimated that if nothing changed, the company would lose about $4 million over the next 2 quarters. She hit send, then waited. Tuesday passed. Wednesday passed. No response. Not a single line. She checked her inbox 3 times a day, and each time she opened it, her email sat there like an envelope no one had bothered to open. On Thursday, she sent it again. This time, it was longer, more detailed, with a comparison table between the 3 past projects and the one currently underway. She wrote with clarity, step by step, the kind of writing anyone would understand if they read it. This time, she didn't have to wait long. A reply came at the end of the day, but not from her manager. It came from his assistant, a brief message of 3 lines, saying that he had received it, would review it when he had time, and thank you. Jolene read those 3 lines and understood everything she needed to understand. Her manager had read it. Her manager understood the issue, but her manager didn't want that error to reach anyone above, because if it did, the first question would be why this team had overlooked it for 5 years. And the person who would have to answer that question wouldn't be Jolene. It would be him. So the simplest solution was to let the email sink, to let it dissolve among hundreds of others, and pretend it had never existed. Jolene sat in front of her screen, her hands resting on the keyboard, and thought. She thought for a long time, because she knew the next step she was about to take wasn't part of any corporate procedure. It was a leap, and if she misjudged it, she would fall. On Friday morning, Jolene opened a new email. The recipient, Reed Caraway, not through her manager, not through a team lead, not through a department head. Straight to the 18th floor. The email was short. 4 sentences. The analysis attached. She hit send at 12 minutes past 8 in the morning. By 9 o'clock, the entire 6th floor knew. Jolene didn't understand how the news spread, but it did. Fast and quiet like smoke. Her colleagues looked at her the way people look at someone who has just stepped into the middle of a highway, not with pity, but with a kind of disbelief, at a risk they couldn't comprehend. Her manager walked past her desk twice without looking at her. Her desk phone rang at 10:15. A woman's voice on the other end spoke briefly, saying that Mr. Caraway wanted to see her, 18th floor, immediately. Jolene stood up. No one on the 6th floor said anything, but she could feel every pair of eyes on her back as she stepped into the elevator. The 18th floor was quiet in a way that didn't come from emptiness, but from people who had learned that speaking less was a form of power. She was led into Reed's office. He sat behind his desk, didn't stand, didn't offer a handshake. He looked at her, the kind of look from someone used to evaluating everything within the first 3 seconds, then spending the rest of the time confirming whether that judgment held true. He said that she knew she had just bypassed 3 levels of management to send him that email. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Jolene answered yes. He asked why. She said she had sent it to her manager twice. The first time there was no response. The second time she received a 3-line reply saying it would be reviewed when there was time. And she understood what those 3 lines meant. If she sent it a third time to the same person, the result would be identical, and he would lose $4 million next quarter without knowing why. Reed said nothing. He looked at her, and the silence stretched long enough that anyone else would have started explaining more, speaking more, filling the space with words because they couldn't bear the pressure of being watched without a response. Jolene didn't add anything. She stood there, met his gaze, and waited. He told her to sit down and explain it to him. Jolene sat, opened the file, and for the next 20 minutes, she laid out everything she had found. Each project, each number, each connection between the 3 past files and the one currently in motion. She spoke evenly, not fast, not slow, not trying to impress, just presenting the truth in the order it needed to be heard. Reed didn't interrupt once. When she finished, he closed the laptop, looked at her a moment longer. He told her to return to her desk and not to speak to anyone about the meeting. Jolene stood, nodded, and walked out. She stepped into the elevator, pressed 6, and when the doors closed, she allowed herself a long breath. She didn't know that on the 18th floor, after she left, Reed opened her file again, read it one more time, then took a pen and underlined her name on the first page. In Reed Caraway's world, he didn't mark many names, but the ones he marked were never erased. No one announced anything. No one sent an official email. No one called a meeting to explain. It was simply that, starting the week after her meeting on the 18th floor, high-level analytical projects began appearing in Jolene's inbox. Not from her direct manager, from the 18th floor. The first project was a risk analysis for a commercial complex on the west side of the city. The second was a financial assessment for a land acquisition deal out in the suburbs. The third was a cash flow structure for a construction contract the entire floor was working on, yet no one had identified the issue. Each time a new project arrived, the 6th floor glanced at one another. The whispers began small, then grew, like water seeping through a wall, not loud enough to force anyone to speak, but steady enough that everyone could hear. They wondered who she knew upstairs. They assumed she must have someone backing her. They questioned whether it was normal for someone so new to be handed major projects. Jolene heard it. She always heard it. But she had learned long ago that whispers fed no one, and they killed no one either, unless a person let them take up space inside their mind. She didn't. She worked. Her direct manager showed his irritation openly but said nothing. Because the projects came from the 18th floor, and at Caraway Holdings, no one questioned the 18th floor. It was a rule never written in any employee handbook, yet everyone knew it by heart. Derek Hale was a mid-level manager on the 6th floor. the one officially in charge of the analysis team Jolene belonged to, though she no longer truly reported to him. Derek was 40 years old, had been at Caraway for 8 years, the kind of man who believed tenure was a form of currency, and anyone new who received more than he did must be stealing it. He didn't say it outright, but he found ways to say it, and he chose his moment carefully. The team meeting on Wednesday afternoon, conference room B on the 6th floor, 11 people seated around a long table. Jolene was presenting the risk analysis for the West Side commercial project, the one assigned to her by the 18th floor. She had spoken for about 10 minutes, just entering the core of her findings, when Derek cut in. He said he would summarize it for everyone to make it easier to understand, because the presentation was getting a bit long. He stretched the word long as if he were doing the room a favor by interrupting her. The room fell silent. No one looked at Jolene. No one looked at Derek. They stared down at the table or into their laptops, the look of people who had already chosen a side, and the side they chose was to have no side at all. Jolene stopped. She looked at Derek. She didn't get angry. She didn't flush. She looked at him with a stillness she had practiced for a long time, a look that gave him nothing to hold on to, no anger for him to call her volatile, no sadness for him to call her weak, no smile for him to call her unserious. She told him to go ahead and summarize, that she was listening. Derek hadn't expected that. He had expected hesitation, or quiet compliance, or a soft permission for him to continue. Instead, she handed him the floor, and now he had to perform. Derek stood, cleared his throat, and began summarizing Jolene's analysis. He spoke with confidence. The problem was, he summarized it incorrectly. He said the cost overrun for the West Side commercial project was currently around $3.2 million. Jolene let him finish. She didn't interrupt. When he stopped, she reopened the slide on the screen. She said it was 4.1 million, not 3.2, and that he was looking at last quarter's figure. The updated number was on page 7, line 14. The entire room turned to the screen. The number was there, clear as day, 4.1 million, exactly where she said it would be. Derek looked at the screen, then looked down. He didn't say another word for the rest of the meeting. No one did. But this silence was different from the one when Derek had cut her off. That silence had been the silence of people turning away. This one was the silence of people who had just felt something shift in the room, something no one named, but everyone recognized. Jolene finished the rest of her presentation. No faster, no slower, no change in tone. When she was done, she closed her laptop, stood, and walked out of the room. She didn't look at Derek. She didn't need to. And Derek, sitting there with 10 others pretending to check their emails, understood something he would never admit out loud. The woman who sat in the corner of the 6th floor, beside the old record storage, was not someone he would be able to cut off a second time. The more projects she received from the 18th floor, the deeper Jolene looked into the financial system of Caraway Holdings. And the deeper she looked, the more she saw things that didn't belong there. Large sums moving through subsidiary companies that had no employees, no offices, no real business activity beyond a registered name on paper. Construction contracts, priced at twice the market rate, signed with contractors whose presence online led only to an empty website and a phone number no one answered. Money flowing in loops through 4, 5 accounts, only to return to a single point, clean on paper, yet clearly not the path legitimate money would take. Jolene didn't need anyone to explain it to her. She had studied finance. She knew what clean money looked like, and she knew what she was seeing wasn't clean. Caraway Holdings wasn't just real estate. It was something larger, deeper, and far more dangerous than the name displayed in the lobby on the 1st floor. That evening, Jolene sat in front of her screen in her apartment and thought about her 2 choices. Leave. Go back to the South Side, back to 3 months of unemployment, back to sending out applications to places where she would sit beside a printer for a few more years until someone noticed she was good, or no one ever did. Or stay. In a place that wasn't clean, wasn't safe, but was the only place where her mind was valued at the right price. She didn't lie to herself with noble reasons. She didn't tell herself she would change the system from within, or that she stayed because she wanted to do the right thing. She stayed because she didn't have a better option, and she was too tired to start over again. 2 months after that decision, on a Tuesday night, Jolene's phone rang at 11 o'clock. A number from the 18th floor. An urgent meeting. Come up immediately. When she stepped into the conference room on the 18th floor, 11 people were already seated. The entire senior management of Caraway. The air in the room felt heavy in a way she recognized at once. Something had just fractured, and everyone was trying to keep the pieces from falling apart in front of them. Reed sat at the head of the table. His face looked no different from usual, still composed, but Jolene noticed something small, his fingers tapping against the tabletop, slow and steady, like a countdown. The largest deal of the year, a commercial complex worth more than $20 million, had just lost its partner at the last minute. The reason wasn't clear. It could have been external pressure. It could have been the partner finding another opportunity. But the outcome was certain. If they didn't find an alternative within 48 hours, Caraway would lose the deposit, lose credibility, and lose leverage in every deal that followed. One by one, the managers presented their solutions. The first suggested finding a new partner. Reed asked if that could be done in 48 hours. The man fell silent. The second suggested suing the partner for breach of contract. Reed looked at him the way one might look at someone proposing to dig a tunnel with a spoon. The third, the fourth, the fifth. Each proposal was offered and dismissed by Reed's silence, a silence heavier than any spoken refusal. Jolene sat at the far end of the table. She didn't speak. 40 minutes passed, and she didn't open her mouth once. She sat there, listening, and in her mind, the numbers began to rearrange themselves, like pieces she could see from above, instead of from the table. When the last person finished, and the room fell into the tired silence of people who had run out of ideas, Jolene opened her laptop. She said there was a way. 11 heads turned toward her. She explained. Not finding a new partner, changing the capital structure, splitting the risk into 3 parts instead of placing it all in one, bringing in a third party, an investment fund she had found while analyzing older files, a fund that was searching for exactly the kind of project Caraway had, yet no one had thought to connect the two. She spoke for 7 minutes. Clear. Precise. Not a word wasted. When she stopped, the room was quiet. Reed looked at her, then at the other 11. He told them to follow her plan. Jolene closed her laptop. She said she needed sleep and would send the details the next day. She stood and walked toward the door. Reed called her name. She stopped. The others had already left. Only the 2 of them remained in the conference room. Reed stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on the back of his chair. He said that tonight she had just saved more than $20 million for the company, and that he would like to take her to dinner. She told him she had a rule about not having dinner with her boss. Reed looked at her. It was only a brief moment, but long enough for her to understand that he wasn't used to being refused, not out of arrogance, but because no one ever did. He said she was the first person in the building to turn him down. She replied that someone had to start. Jolene gave a small nod, turned, and walked out. The conference room door closed behind her. Reed stood alone in the large room. 12 empty chairs surrounding him. The fluorescent lights casting their steady glow across the table where, just minutes earlier, 11 men had failed to find an answer that a woman at the far end had seen by the 10th minute. And for the first time in a very long while, Reed Caraway didn't quite know what to think about someone. The commercial complex deal was saved, but the construction permit was not. Someone on the west side of the city was playing a different game. The permit was stalled, the official in charge suddenly stopped answering calls, and Sully's sources confirmed it. A real estate boss on the west side, a man whose name everyone in Chicago knew but no one spoke aloud, had paid off exactly the right people to block Caraway. Reed didn't get angry. He called Jolene up to the 18th floor and said one sentence, that he needed to know where the man was hiding his money. Jolene took 4 days. 4 days digging through public records, tax filings, corporate registrations, numbers her opponent believed had been buried deep enough. But Jolene was the kind of person who, once she started digging, didn't stop until she hit the bottom. She found it. Tax fraud. Clear. Systematic. Stretching across years. She printed the documents, placed them in an envelope, and handed it to Reed without saying another word. Reed invited the rival to dinner. The meal ended quickly. When dessert was brought out, Reed placed the envelope on the table, right beside the other man's plate. He said that his construction permit would be approved before Friday, his voice calm. as if he were talking about the weather. He added that the man didn't need to answer now, only remember that he never invited anyone to dinner a second time. The rival looked at the envelope, looked at Reed, then stood and left the restaurant without touching the dessert. The permit was approved before Friday. In the car on the way back, Sully drove. Reed sat in the back seat, silent, looking out through the window. Sully spoke lightly, as if thinking out loud, saying that Reed was like his old man, that he never made a move when he was angry. Reed didn't respond. Sully didn't need him to. They both knew who that was about. Reed's father, the man who had built everything from nothing and lost it all when the people he trusted most turned away. Reed was 20 years old when it happened, and he had spent the 13 years since rebuilding from the ashes. But this time, he built by a single rule: trust no one until they prove they deserve it. Jolene was one of the very few who had passed that test, and she didn't even know she had been tested. Ruth came on a Saturday morning, without notice. She took the bus from the south side, changed lines twice, spent nearly an hour and a half getting there. Jolene opened the door and found her mother standing in the hallway, wearing her old walking shoes, holding the same cloth bag she had carried for years. Jolene said that she hadn't called ahead. Ruth replied that she wanted to see how her daughter lived when she wasn't preparing to be seen. Jolene took her to the Caraway Holdings building, not because she wanted to show it off, but because Ruth had asked where she worked and wanted to see, and Jolene didn't know how to say no to her mother. They stepped into the lobby on the first floor. Polished stone floors, high ceilings, light that was even and cool, the kind of light people paid a great deal of money to create. The receptionist recognized Jolene immediately, stood up, smiled, and greeted her as Miss Marsh. Ruth looked at the receptionist, looked at the lobby, looked at the glass elevators, looked at the 2 security guards in suits near the entrance. She said nothing. They went up to the 6th floor. Jolene showed her mother her desk, no longer in the corner by the old records storage, now moved to an area near the windows, with space of her own. Colleagues passed by and nodded to Jolene, polite nods with a trace of caution. Ruth watched everything. She watched the way people looked at her daughter. She looked at the desk, the chair, the large screen. She looked at the view of the city, beyond the window. She said nothing. When they left the building, Jolene brought her mother to her new apartment. It was in a better area than the south side, with a separate living room, a kitchen wide enough for 2 people to stand in, and a window overlooking a small park below. Ruth stepped inside, walked around slowly, her hand brushing lightly across the kitchen counter, opening the refrigerator, looking inside, then closing it, standing at the window for a while, looking out. All day she spoke no more than 10 sentences. Jolene cooked for her. Simple food, white rice, braised meat, boiled vegetables, the things she had learned from her mother when she was a child. They sat at the kitchen table and ate. Ruth ate slowly. Jolene ate even more slowly because she was waiting. She knew her mother. The silence wasn't because there was nothing to say. The silence meant Ruth was arranging everything she had seen that day, placing each piece beside the next, preparing to speak a sentence she had been forming all afternoon. Ruth set her fork down. She asked where the money had come from. Jolene stopped eating, looked at her mother, said nothing. Ruth didn't repeat the question. She said the next sentence, slowly, clearly, each word carrying the weight of a woman who had worked night shifts for 20 years and never once brought home money she couldn't account for. She said she wasn't asking how much Jolene made. She was asking how she made it. Jolene looked down at her bowl of rice. She wanted to lie. She wanted to say it was just a normal real estate company. She wanted to say something gentle so her mother would nod and keep eating, and they could talk about the weather or about old neighbors on the south side. But Ruth was the only person Jolene couldn't lie to, not because her mother would catch it, but because lying to her was different from lying to anyone else. To lie to her mother would be to cut away the last part of herself she still believed was clean. Jolene said she was doing what she did best, in a place that wasn't perfect, but she wasn't hurting anyone. Her voice was softer than usual. Ruth looked at her daughter for a long time, the kind of look that said without words that she didn't fully believe that answer, but she wasn't accusing her daughter of lying either. The look of someone who had lived long enough to understand that the line between not hurting anyone and allowing harm to happen was very thin, and sometimes people stood on that line, telling themselves they were still on one side when their foot had already crossed to the other. Ruth said she wasn't afraid of her daughter being poor. She was afraid of her losing the one thing money couldn't buy back. Jolene didn't answer. Ruth finished her meal, washed the dishes, took her bag, and caught the bus back to the south side before 9 in the evening because she had a night shift. Jolene stood at the door and watched her go. That night, she didn't sleep. Derek Hale didn't forget. There are people who lose face, swallow it, and move on. Derek wasn't that kind. He was the kind who swallowed it and let it ferment inside, waiting until there were enough others willing to drink before he uncorked it. He found two senior managers, men who had been at Caraway long enough to see Jolene's rapid rise as a slap across their own faces. They didn't hate her for doing anything wrong. They hated her because she did too many things right, too quickly, and it forced them to look at themselves in the mirror and not like what they saw. The three of them met, after hours. Not inside the Caraway building, no email trail, and within 2 weeks, they built a fabricated file, precise down to the smallest detail. Evidence that Jolene had transferred money from a project account into an anonymous personal account. The amount wasn't large, a few $100,000, just enough to be believable, not enough to raise suspicion about how someone at her level could access it. They used her own system credentials to create the trail. The transaction times matched the nights she had worked late alone, nights when no one else was on the 6th floor but her and the glow of her screen. Every number aligned. Every trace pointed to one person. The file was sent to the 18th floor on Monday morning. Reed read it in his office. Alone. Sully stood outside the door and sensed something was wrong when Reed didn't call anyone in for 45 minutes. When the door finally opened, Reed's face looked no different from usual. Flat. No anger. No sorrow. Nothing at all. And Sully knew that nothing was more dangerous than any anger. Reed called Human Resources, gave a short order. Suspend Jolene Marsh for 48 hours. Revoke all system access. Escort her out of the building, effective immediately. Jolene was sitting at her desk when 2 security staff approached. She looked up, saw them, and understood at once, even before they spoke, because she had seen that look before, the look of people carrying out an order they themselves were not comfortable with. They addressed her, asking her to gather her personal belongings and follow them. The entire 6th floor slowed. Not stopped completely, not enough for keyboards to fall silent or phone calls to end. But everyone heard, everyone knew, and everyone chose the same action, to look away. Jolene stood. She picked up her bag, placed a few items inside, not many, because she had never kept much of herself at work. She walked with the 2 guards, past the rows of desks, past the printer area where she had once sat in her earliest days, past conference room B where she had left Derek Hale speechless, past the elevator lobby, into the elevator, down to the 1st floor, across the glass lobby where her mother had once stood in silence just a week before. She walked through the lobby with her back straight, her eyes fixed on the exit. She didn't lower her gaze. She didn't turn back. The receptionist, the one who had once addressed her mother with the utmost politeness, now looked down at her desk as Jolene passed. The guard by the door stepped aside without meeting her eyes. And in that moment, Jolene understood that the act of people turning away carried the same taste, no matter where it happened. It was exactly like the buffet party 7 years ago. No one spoke. No one needed to, only this time, it hurt more. Because 7 years ago, she had been a new employee no one knew, and that turning away had only confirmed she didn't matter. This time, she was the one who had saved a $20 million deal, the one who had uncovered errors the entire company had missed, the one who had sat across from Reed Caraway in the conference room on the 18th floor. And this turning away confirmed something else, that no matter what she did, how capable she was, how much she contributed, when the building decided to push her out, no one would stand still. The glass door closed behind her, a soft click, identical to the sound of the door at her old company 7 years ago. Jolene stepped onto the sidewalk, the Chicago wind hitting her face, and stood there for a moment, watching the traffic pass without truly seeing it. She drove back to her apartment, opened the door, didn't turn on the lights, sat down on the sofa in the living room, her bag at her feet, her coat still on her shoulders. Outside the window, the city shifted from afternoon into evening. Jolene didn't get up to turn on the lights. She sat in the dark, and the darkness filled the room minute by minute, slowly, like rising water. She didn't call anyone. Not her mother, because Ruth was on her night shift, and because Jolene didn't know what she would say. Not any friends, because she didn't have anyone in this city close enough to call in the middle of the night and say she had just been escorted out of a building like a criminal. She sat there and thought. Thought about her mother standing at the packaging line under factory lights. Thought about her old company, about Tiffany, about the words that she had finally learned she didn't belong there. Thought about the 6th floor, the 18th floor, about Reed sitting and reading a file about her without calling her in to ask a single question. Thought about every door she had walked through, and how each time the door had closed behind her with the same sound. And she wondered, sitting in the darkness of an apartment she paid for with money from a place that had just pushed her out, whether this time would be the last. That same night, while Jolene sat in the dark inside her apartment, the 18th floor of the Caraway building remained lit. Reed didn't go home. He sat behind his desk, the file accusing Jolene open in front of him, and read it again from the beginning. A second time, a third, not because he didn't understand what it said, but because there was something in that file that unsettled him, the kind of unease that comes from having read too many files in a lifetime to know that when everything fits too perfectly, it's usually because someone has spent a great deal of effort making it fit. Reed picked up the phone, dialed a number he rarely used. On the other end was an independent auditor, someone who didn't work for Caraway, didn't belong to any team inside the firm, didn't draw a salary from him. This was the one person Reed trusted in situations where he couldn't trust anyone inside. He said he needed him at the building immediately, to bring a laptop, and not to tell anyone. The auditor arrived at 11 that night. Reed handed him the entire file, full access to Caraway's financial system, and a single instruction. He wanted to know whether the file was real or fabricated, and he wanted to know before morning. Then he sat down and waited. Reed Caraway wasn't the kind of man who paced when he was uneasy. He didn't tap his fingers, didn't check the time, didn't rise and sit again. He sat, quiet, patient in the way only someone accustomed to waiting in the dark could be. Because for Reed, waiting wasn't helplessness. Waiting was a form of control. He waited because he chose to wait. And when he had enough information, he would act, not sooner, not later. At 3 a.m, Sully opened the door and stepped in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of Reed without asking. By then, Reed had taken off his jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, his eyes still fixed on the laptop where the auditor worked across the room. Sully looked at the scene, at the stack of documents, at the 3rd cup of coffee long gone cold that Reed hadn't finished, and said that he could assign this to the internal audit team and let them handle it. Reed didn't look up. He said no. Sully asked why. Reed was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, each word clear, measured, as if he were speaking more to himself than to anyone else, saying that if she was clean, he needed to be the one to know first, and if she wasn't, he needed to be the one to know first as well. Sully said nothing more. He knew that tone. It was the tone Reed used when a decision had already been made, and any further discussion would be a waste of time. He stepped outside, closed the door quietly, and stood guard in the hallway as he had for 13 years. Inside, Reed drank his coffee and waited. 4 hours passed. At 5 a.m, when the sky beyond the glass began to shift from black to gray, the auditor stopped. He looked up, removed his glasses, and set them down in a way Reed recognized immediately, the gesture of someone who had found something and was choosing how to say it. He said the file was fabricated, entirely. He turned the screen toward Reed. Layer by layer, he peeled it back. Metadata still held traces of edits, showing the documents had been created and modified within the same short window, not accumulated over months as the file intended others to believe. The cash flow entries had been backdated, meaning someone created the transactions first, then altered the timestamps to match Jolene's late-night work schedule, and the system access used to create the trail hadn't come from Jolene's account. It had come from 3 senior management accounts, then fed back into the system to appear as if it were hers. 3 accounts, 3 names. Derek Hale, and 2 senior managers Reed knew by face, by name, men who had sat across from him in long meetings. Reed finished reading. He closed the report, closed the laptop, sat still for a moment, long enough for the auditor to grow uneasy but not dare speak. Then, Reed stood, opened the door. Sully was still in the hallway. Reed said 3 people. His voice was even. No rise, no fall. Nothing in it suggested he had been awake all night. He said that by morning, before 9, they were to be out of the building, all system access revoked, employee badges and company devices collected, human resources to prepare termination papers, and that he didn't need to see them. Sully nodded. He didn't ask why, didn't ask for names. He would know when he needed to know. Reed returned to his office. Daylight had fully arrived beyond the glass. Chicago was waking. And on his desk, the last cup of coffee had gone cold. He picked up the phone and made a single call before the new day began. Jolene's phone rang at 15 minutes past 7 in the morning. She was still sitting where she had been all night, on the sofa, her coat still on her shoulders, her bag still at her feet. She looked at the screen. It wasn't a number from Human Resources. It was a direct line from the 18th floor, she answered. Reed's voice came through, brief, no greeting, no explanation, telling her that her chair was still where it had been. Then he hung up. Jolene watched the screen fade to black. She sat there for another minute. Then she stood, went to the bathroom, washed her face, changed her clothes, took her car keys, and drove to the Caraway building. She stepped into the lobby on the first floor. The receptionist looked at her, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded in a normal greeting. The security guard at the door didn't stop her. Her employee badge worked again when she swiped through the gate. The elevator carried her up to the 6th floor. The doors opened. Jolene stepped out. Her desk was still there, in the same place by the window. Her laptop sat on the table exactly where she had left it when the 2 security officers came for her 2 days earlier. But 3 things were different. Derek Hale's desk was empty. No monitor, no familiar coffee cup, no small family photograph beside the keyboard. Just a bare surface and a chair pushed neatly in. 2 other desks across from his were empty as well. The same kind of emptiness, clean, orderly, as if the people who had sat there had never existed. No one explained, no announcement email, no brief meeting to say that 3 colleagues had left the company for personal reasons. Nothing at all. At Caraway Holdings, when someone disappeared, the disappearance itself was the explanation. Jolene sat down, opened her laptop. The screen lit up, the system running normally, every access restored. She opened the project file she had been working on before her suspension, scrolled to the last line she had left, and continued typing. As if nothing had happened. Around her, the 6th floor worked as usual, but no one passed her desk without a glance. Not the old kind of glance, not curiosity, not dismissal, a different kind altogether, caution. End quote. Because everyone on the 6th floor had witnessed the past 2 days. They had seen Jolene escorted out of the building by security. They had seen 3 managers disappear overnight, and they pieced the story together in their own minds. Someone had tried to bring Jolene Marsh down, and in the end, they were the ones erased. In the world of Caraway, no message needed to be written. The message was already there, in 3 empty desks, and everyone on the 6th floor knew how to read it. 2 weeks passed. Jolene worked as usual, or at least it looked usual from the outside. She came to the office, sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and did what she had always done, analyzing, reading numbers, writing reports. The 3 empty desks slowly became part of the 6th floor, like a blank space on a wall where a painting once hung and no one bothered to replace it. People adapted. People always adapt. But Derek Hale and the 2 former managers didn't adapt. They lost their jobs, lost access, lost their employee badges, lost everything connected to Caraway Holdings in less than a morning, and they knew exactly because of whom. One Thursday evening, Jolene left the office later than usual. She walked from the underground parking toward her apartment, a distance of about 4 blocks, a route she had taken hundreds of times without ever thinking about safety, because this was Chicago. She had grown up on the South Side, and she knew how to move through streets at night. She turned into the stretch between 2 buildings, where the streetlights didn't quite reach, and the noise from the main avenue faded into a distant hum. 2 figures stepped out from the alley ahead. Jolene stopped. Instinct. She looked at them. 2 men, faces covered, standing in the middle of the path, about 10 steps away. They said nothing, hadn't yet had the chance to say anything, Because a third figure appeared from behind her, stepping between her and the two men, quick and precise, as if he had been there all along, waiting for the exact moment to reveal himself. Sully. He didn't say a word. He simply stood there. But the way he stood, the way his shoulders filled the width of the alley, the way he looked straight at the two men with the steady gaze of someone who had stood in places far darker than this narrow passage, it said everything. The two men looked at Sully, looked at each other, then disappeared into the darkness at the far end of the alley as quickly as they had appeared. Jolene remained still. Her heart was racing, but her hands didn't tremble. She looked at Sully. Sully looked back, gave a small nod, the kind of nod from someone who had completed a task and required no thanks. And in that moment, Jolene understood. Sully wasn't there by chance. He wasn't passing through. He was there because someone had sent him, and that someone could only be one person. Jolene didn't go home. She drove straight to the Caraway building. The 18th floor was still lit, because Reed rarely left before 10 at night. She stepped into his office without knocking. Reed looked up from his screen. If he was surprised to see her, he didn't show it. But he immediately recognized that something was different about her tonight. She was angry. Not the quiet, controlled anger she usually carried, the kind she answered with numbers and precision. This was something sharper, something she had held back for a long time, and tonight it broke through because she had just realized she had been watched by the very person she trusted most. Jolene asked if he had someone following her. No greeting, no preface. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word carried the weight of someone holding something much larger beneath the surface. Reed set his pen down, looked at her. He said he protected his people. Jolene answered that she wasn't his property. The words left her faster than she intended. Faster and heavier. Because it wasn't just about Sully or being followed. It was about everything. About a life spent trying to escape being decided for, being looked down on, being pushed or held in place by someone else's will. And now, even in the one place she thought she was judged by her ability, she realized someone was still making decisions for her without asking. Reed was silent, longer than usual. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something shift across his face, subtle, almost imperceptible, but she caught it, because she had learned how to read him over these past months. He said she was right. His voice was softer than she had ever heard it. Slower, as if he were weighing each word. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he wanted to say it correctly. He said she wasn't his property, but he would still not allow anyone to touch her. Jolene looked at him. The room was quiet. Beyond the glass, Chicago at night flickered in the distance, and the wind slipping through the frame made a faint sound no one noticed during the day. Jolene didn't say thank you, didn't say she understood, didn't say anything more. She turned and walked out. The door closed behind her. Reed remained alone, and both of them, on opposite sides of that door, knew that something had changed between them that night. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something neither of them had a name for, a quiet kind of respect that only strong people give each other when they recognize that the other is the only one who isn't trying to change them. A few days after the night in the alley, Jolene returned to the Caraway building at nearly 9 in the evening. She had forgotten a folder on her desk, something she needed to finish a report at home. The 6th floor was empty, the lights already off, with only the glow from the exit sign at the end of the hallway casting a faint green strip across the floor. She took the folder, slipped it into her bag, then remembered she had printed the 3rd quarter report for Reed and left it on her desk earlier that afternoon. She picked it up and went to the 18th floor. The elevator doors opened. The 18th floor was dark. Not the kind of dark that comes when people leave and someone switches off the lights. This was a chosen darkness. Jolene stepped out, past the empty reception area, and turned into the hallway leading to Reed's office. The door was open. Inside, Reed sat behind his desk. No desk lamp, no overhead light, only the city's glow through the glass, just enough for Jolene to make out the line of his face and the glass of water on the table. He didn't look up when she stood at the doorway, or perhaps he already knew she was there without needing to look. Jolene didn't ask if he was all right. She knew he hated that question, not because he didn't want anyone to care, but because the question demanded an answer. And when someone like Reed answers whether he is all right, whether he says yes or no, He is giving away something he doesn't give easily. So, she didn't ask. She said she had left the third quarter report on his desk, that there had been a typo on page 14, and she had corrected it before printing. She placed the report at the corner of his desk, turned, walked toward the door. Reed called her name. She stopped, didn't turn around, waited. The silence stretched for a few seconds. Then Reed spoke, his voice lower than usual, slower than usual, as if each word had to push through something inside him before it was allowed out. He said he had fired 3 people the other day, people who had been with him for years, people he had trusted completely. Jolene turned back, looked at him. In the darkness, she couldn't clearly see his eyes, but she could hear his voice, and that told her more than any expression could. This wasn't the voice of Reed Caraway in meetings, or at dinners with rivals, or in those brief 3-word calls to human resources. This was the voice of a tired man. Not tired from lack of sleep, tired from having to cut things away. He said his father had once trusted his people too, and had lost everything because of it. He didn't say more, didn't explain what his father had lost, or how it had happened, or what it had done to him afterward. 2 sentences. Enough. And Jolene understood, because she was the kind of person who didn't need the full story to understand its weight. She understood that he was sitting in the dark not because he regretted firing those 3 people. He was sitting there because every time he had to cut someone away, he saw his father again. Saw the 20-year-old version of himself standing in the wreckage his father left behind, forced to rebuild everything with his bare hands. He fired people because he had to. That didn't mean it didn't hurt. Jolene stood at the doorway. She didn't step closer, didn't sit down, didn't place a hand on his shoulder, or offer any sentence that began with, "I understand," because she knew that for Reed, closeness wasn't about sitting beside someone. Closeness was knowing when to stay still. She said that some things have to be cut away for what remains to live, and that he knew that better than anyone. Reed looked at her. In the darkness, she couldn't tell if he was looking into her eyes, or past her into something farther away. Then he nodded. A small nod. Slow. The kind of nod from someone who had just heard exactly what he needed. Nothing more, nothing less. Jolene turned, stepped out, and closed the office door behind her, gently. The soft click fit the silence of the 18th floor. She walked into the elevator, pressed the button, and as the doors closed, she stood there alone with the thought that tonight she had seen something no one else in that building had ever been allowed to see. Reed Caraway was tired, not because he was weak, but because he had been strong for too long, and she was the only one he allowed to see it, because she was the only one who knew how to stand beside him without crossing into him. The contract signing dinner, the largest deal of the year, took place on a Friday night at an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago, the kind Jolene had never set foot in before joining Caraway, the kind where the menu carried no prices, because if you needed to see them, you weren't meant to be sitting there. Jolene sat at the VIP table, the second seat from the head, to Reed's right. She wasn't there because of etiquette. She was there because she was the chief financial officer of Caraway Holdings, the second most powerful person in the company, the same woman who 7 years earlier had sat in the corner of the 6th floor beside the printer. The partners sat across from them, 4 men in suits, speaking about deal structures in that careful, measured tone people use when they know the person at the head of the table can change everything with a single decision. Reed sat where he always did, at the head, speaking little, letting Jolene handle most of the technical discussion while he observed. That was how they worked. Jolene spoke. Reed watched. And when a decision was needed, a small nod from him was enough. The dinner was midway through the main course when a server approached the VIP table with a tray of cocktails. Jolene was explaining profit-sharing ratios when she noticed the hands holding the tray. They were trembling. Not much, just enough for the surface of the drinks to ripple slightly. Jolene looked up, and the world stopped. Not in a dramatic way, no music, no shift in lighting. The world stopped inside her, in a place no one could see. The server, standing beside the table, dressed in black, hair neatly tied back, was Tiffany Kent. 7 years. 7 years since the last time Jolene had seen that face, when Tiffany stood near the reception desk at the old company and said that she had finally learned she didn't belong there, while Jolene walked past with her bag in hand. 7 years. and now Tiffany stood beside the VIP table holding a tray, and her hands were shaking. Memory moved through Jolene. Fast. Laughter at the buffet table. The group chat she was never invited into. The whispers in the elevator. The lunches eaten alone. It all ran through her in seconds, like a reel played too quickly, then stopped. Jolene set her glass down. A fraction slower than usual. Just a fraction. Enough to steady her breathing. Enough to place everything rising inside her back where it had been kept for 7 years. Then she returned to the conversation. Her voice even. Her face unchanged. She continued, saying that the profit distribution would be adjusted quarterly based on actual performance. Tiffany set the cocktails down. Her hands were still shaking, but she didn't spill. She stepped back, then another step, then turned away. She walked toward the corner of the restaurant, where servers waited between rounds, and stood there with the empty tray pressed against her chest, looking toward the VIP table, looking at Jolene. The woman she had once watched at a buffet table and thought was the easiest joke in the room. The woman she was certain would never belong anywhere important. Now, sitting at the VIP table, beside the most powerful man in the room, speaking about numbers that everyone else had to listen to, and Tiffany was holding a tray. From that corner, Tiffany caught fragments of the conversation at the VIP table. The partners spoke about capital structure, about risk ratios, about projected cash flow, and Tiffany understood. She understood every term, every number. She had studied finance, too, the same school, the same year as Jolene. She wasn't foolish. She had never been foolish, but she was holding a tray, and Jolene was seated at the table. The two realizations collided in a single moment, heavy enough that Tiffany leaned back against the wall. The person she had mocked now sat in a place Tiffany had no right to sit, and she, who once had everything, stood in the corner understanding everything they were saying without being allowed to speak. The dinner ended close to 10. Jolene shook hands with the partners, nodded her goodbyes, and left with Reed. She didn't look back toward the corner of the restaurant, didn't look at Tiffany. Not because she didn't want to, but because she knew that if she did, she would have to face something she wasn't ready to name. In the car, Reed drove. Jolene sat in the passenger seat. 2 minutes of silence. Chicago passed by outside, streetlights stretching into blurred lines. Reed didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the road, but he asked who the server at their table was. Jolene looked out the window. For a long time. Then no description of how much it had hurt. Just that one sentence, and it sat between them in the car like something with weight. Reed didn't ask anything else. He didn't say he was sorry for what she had gone through, didn't ask her to tell him more, didn't offer any of the things an ordinary person might say. He said the decision was hers, and that he trusted her judgment. Jolene nodded, looked back out at the road, and for the first time, sitting in the passenger seat of a car moving through Chicago at night, she allowed herself to think that perhaps there was someone in this world who truly saw her, not the surface. Not the weight, not the title, but her. Tiffany made it back to her rented room close to midnight, a small room on the 3rd floor of an old building on the south side of the city, the kind of place where the rent was just low enough for her to cover with a server's wages and just small enough that she never invited anyone over. She didn't turn on the light. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands still carrying the faint scent of dish soap from the evening shift, and stared into the darkness in front of her. Jolene's face at the VIP table rose in her mind. Not angry, not contemptuous, not satisfied or triumphant. Calm. Jolene had looked at her with complete calm, and that calm hurt more than any look of disdain Tiffany could have imagined. Because if Jolene had been angry, Tiffany could have told herself she still mattered, still occupied some space in another person's mind. If Jolene had looked down on her, Tiffany could have turned that into a reason to defend herself. But calm was different. Calm meant Jolene had moved past her a long time ago. Tiffany was no longer a wound. She wasn't even a memory worth holding on to. She was just a server carrying a tray of cocktails past a table. Tiffany sat in the dark, and a sentence from 7 years ago came back. She should have minded her own mouth before worrying about someone else's plate. 7 years ago, when Jolene said that at the buffet table, Tiffany had laughed. She laughed because she believed she was above. She believed that response was nothing more than the bark of someone who knew she had already lost. And Tiffany, with her father, her connections, her seat by the window, would always be the one who won. Now, sitting on the edge of a bed in a rented room whose window faced a trash lot behind the building. The sentence returned, and Tiffany heard it with different ears. Not the ears of a 21-year-old girl so confident it blinded her, but the ears of a 28-year-old woman holding a tray, serving the very person she once mocked. And for the first time, the sentence didn't make her angry. It made her ashamed. Not the kind of shame that burns the face, or reddens the ears, or makes someone want to run. A cold shame. Deep. Settling quietly in her chest and refusing to leave. The kind she knew would stay with her for a long time. Tiffany didn't cry. She sat there, for a long while, in the dark, until the streetlights outside the window dimmed and the sky began to turn toward morning. Then she stood, turned on the light, and opened her laptop. An old laptop she hadn't opened in months, because she hadn't had a reason to. She typed into the search bar, free vocational training programs in Chicago. That same night, on the other side of the city, Jolene didn't sleep either. She sat at the kitchen table in her apartment, opened her laptop, and did something she hadn't expected herself to do. She searched for Tiffany Kent on LinkedIn. The profile appeared. Jolene read it. Slowly. Tiffany's father's company had gone bankrupt 4 years earlier, one bad investment pulling a chain of debt behind it, and the family had lost nearly everything. Tiffany left the family business, the only thing she could do because there was nothing left to leave. After that came a long string of short-term jobs, each one lasting a few months, each move a step lower than the last, until the profile stopped at a gap Jolene understood immediately. There was no longer any job worth listing. Jolene closed the laptop, sat still for a moment. She didn't pity Tiffany. Pity was something she didn't allow herself to give anyone, because she had never wanted to receive it either. And she didn't hate Tiffany anymore. That hate had faded long ago. It had no place in the life Jolene was living now. It was too small compared to what she carried. But she remembered. She remembered the feeling of standing at the buffet table with a plate in her hands and hearing laughter break out across the room. She remembered it clearly, not because it still hurt, but because it had become a part of her, like a scar that had healed, but could still be seen if she looked closely. And she knew that if she could do one small thing, something no one would know, no one would see, no one would credit, then she would do it. Not for Tiffany, but for the 21-year-old version of herself, the girl standing at the buffet table with no one stepping in for her. Jolene opened her email, created a new address, no name, no title, nothing tied to Caraway Holdings. She found a career transition program for women funded by Caraway, copied the link, and sent it to the email address she found on Tiffany's LinkedIn profile. With a single line, "This program might be right for you." No name, no signature, nothing more. 2. Tiffany received the email the next morning, while she sat in front of her laptop with tired eyes and the search bar still showing the words, "Free vocational training programs in Chicago." She looked at the message. Read the single line again and again. She didn't know who sent it, didn't know why. But at that moment, after a night sitting in the dark with that cold shame in her chest and a 7-year-old sentence echoing in her mind, the message arrived like a door she hadn't known was there, opened by someone she couldn't see, but one she knew she needed to walk through. And for the first time in a very long while, Tiffany Kent believed she deserved a second chance. Early one morning, before Chicago had truly woken up, Jolene drove through the South Side. She had no meetings scheduled, no calls waiting, no one expecting her on the 18th floor. She simply drove, following roads her feet had known long before she understood what it meant to know something by heart. She did not go into her mother's home. She stopped instead at a small parking lot beside the old grocery store on the corner, the place where years ago she used to sit on the steps and wait for her mother to finish the night shift. She turned off the engine, opened the cup of coffee she had bought at a gas station along the way, and sat there, watching the neighborhood wake up. A man rolled open the metal door of a laundromat across the street, moving with the slow, practiced rhythm of someone who had done the same motion thousands of times. A woman carried a market bag, walking quickly along the sidewalk, her slippers brushing softly against the concrete. A delivery truck pulled up in front of the grocery store, the driver jumping down, lifting crates of soda inside, ordinary and repetitive like every other morning. The South Side did not know who Jolene was beyond this neighborhood. Here, she was not a chief financial officer, not the woman seated beside Reed Caraway at a VIP table. Not the girl who had once been laughed at over a plate of food. Here, she was simply Ruth's daughter, the woman who worked night shifts at a packaging factory. And this morning, that was enough. Her phone vibrated. A message from Reed. One short line about a meeting scheduled for Monday next week, along with a number she needed to verify before meeting the partners. Jolene read it, typed back 4 words, and sent it. The world of power fit neatly inside the screen of her phone, only a touch away. The phone vibrated again. A message from her mother. Remember to buy milk when you stop by. Jolene looked at the message. Looked at it longer than any $1 million contract she had ever read. Longer than any financial analysis, any email from the 18th floor, any number she had ever underlined in red ink. And then, she smiled. For the first time in this entire story, Jolene Marsh truly smiled. Not the polite smile she gave partners at dinner, not the tight smile meant to hide something underneath, but a real smile, soft, just the slightest lift at one corner of her mouth, the kind she used to give her mother when they sat at the small kitchen table in their Southside apartment, the kind no one but Ruth had ever seen. She texted back 1 word. Yes, that was enough. She started the car, pulled out of the parking lot, drove toward the grocery store to buy milk. Outside, Chicago woke up and began a new day, loud, hurried, and indifferent in the way only Chicago knew how to be. And inside the car, turning onto a familiar street in the South Side, the woman who had once been laughed at by an entire room over a plate of food was on her way to buy milk for her mother. Calm. Whole. Exactly where she needed to be. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like and share so that more people can hear it. Perhaps someone out there needs this story at exactly this moment. How do you feel about Jolene's story? Write your thoughts in the comments and let us know. We always want to listen to what comes from the deepest place in your heart. Subscribe to our channel so you do not miss the next story. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.